Well, I don't know if you've ever gone out of your way to maybe help somebody. Maybe, you've given up part of your day and helped somebody with a project, or you've done some things that just have required a lot of you. And then you turn around and the person that you helped or the people that you helped didn't really say thank you. How does that make you feel? I know you're not looking for a thank you, you're not looking for a pat on the back, but sometimes when you offer your services, when you help somebody out, you kind of expect a little bit of a thank you. And how do you feel when that doesn't happen? I'm not thinking of any particular situation, so don't worry about it. But I mean, how do you feel when people don't thank you? You feel kind of maybe cheap a little bit, or used, or taken advantage of, or maybe even a little bit angry, when somebody doesn't say thank you to you. And, but what happens? Turn it around. What happens when somebody, writes you a thank you letter? You get that thank you letter in the mail. Hey, thank you so much for helping me out. Thank you so much for doing this for me. When that happens, I mean, at least for me, I feel like, man, I feel valued. I feel like, I'm propped up. I feel like I'm on cloud nine. Somebody recognized what I did and recognized me for that, and I feel good about that. And I'm sure you do too as well. Well, we're supposed to thank people, and we're supposed to, offer up our gratitude, because in a sense, it just feels good to have somebody thank you. And the person that is thanking that person, there's a sense of humility on their part, that, man, they benefited, they're humble, they're saying, man, I really appreciate what you do. Well, how do you thank God? I've thought about that, and I think, we can say thanks, but you can't give him a gift. You can't really write him a letter of sorts. But how do you thank God? That's what we're going to look at today in the book of Leviticus. We're in Leviticus. We're in about our third week, and the people during about this time of the book here in chapter 2 and what we're going to be studying, God has given them a way to say thank you, a way to say thank you to him, and it's through a certain offering. Now, if you haven't been with us, I'll just kind of brief you on where we've been, and you might remember from a couple weeks ago, for those of you that have been here, Leviticus is one of the most important books of the Old Testament. I know it's one of those books that as you read it, you're kind of like, what are they even saying here? But many scholars would say Leviticus is kind of the pinnacle. It's the highlight. It's the key book to understand. And yet a lot of times we read right by it, or we skip on to the New Testament because it's really difficult to understand. Well, Leviticus is an interesting book. I know as I've grown and kind of read it, the thing that's hit me is that it's really building up from the first two books of the Bible. First of all, Genesis, and then Exodus, and then you have the third book, Leviticus, which is the high point. And as you remember in the book of Genesis starts out, and it's God has created this perfect place, this Garden of Eden, this place where man and woman dwell, and they dwell in the presence of God, and everything is perfect. The relationships are perfect, their emotional health is perfect, physically everything is perfect, the earth is perfect, but the most important thing is God dwells with his people here in the garden. But quickly, as we move on into Genesis 3, we see that, Adam and Eve, they think, God, thanks for your advice, but we can do life better without you. We can do our own thing, and probably it's better, and so we're going to eat from this tree, and we're going to figure things out, and thanks for your help, God, but we're going to do it on our own. We're going to be independent from you. And that's what we call the fall. And at that point in the fall, as man and women are independent, they choose their own independent way, they do their own thing, at the fall, everything breaks. Everything is broken. Their relationship with God is broken. Their relationship to one another is broken. The world around them is fractured and twisted and messed up. Everything that we touch is broken. And yet God still wants to have a relationship. He wants to have people enjoy his presence. And so as we move into that second book, that book of Exodus, They flee Egypt through a series of miracles and plagues and things like that. And then God demonstrates his love for people in that he still wants people to enjoy his presence. And so he instructs the people of Exodus. He says, build this tabernacle, build this tent of meeting, build this place where I can meet with you. And so they build this tent, this place, and there's a lot of particular things that he has them build, and the way they build it, and the way that they're supposed to put articles in there. And then we get to the end of Exodus, and we see Moses is still, even though he's the holiest person, even the holiest person can't enjoy the presence of God. He can't go into that tent of meeting. He's kept out. And the reason he's kept out, and the reason that we can't enjoy the presence of God, is we still have this sin, that this unholiness about us, this impurity about us, and God cannot allow people into his presence that are unholy, that are filled with sin, that are impure. God can only allow people into his presence, those people that are pure, that are holy, that are righteous in every single way. And so that's the question, that probably a lot of us ask. How can we, an unholy and a sinful and impure people, experience this relationship with God? How can we enter into his presence? And that's what the people of Leviticus were wondering as well. Moses was kept out, and so as we begin the book of Leviticus, that's really the question that this book is trying to answer. The book of Leviticus is about how sinful people in the Old Testament can dwell in the presence of a holy God. And so as the book goes on, we see that the answer is found in a series of sacrifices, of offerings. God makes it possible for unholy people to enter his presence through these sacrifices. And that's what Leviticus is about, is how the Old Testament people can enjoy that. And so as we read through Leviticus, God has given guidelines to his people, to the people of the Old Testament. Here is how you can enter into the presence of a holy God. And so last week we talked about the first of 5 sacrifices, the first one being the burnt offering. And what happened in the burnt offering, if you remember, is that a person, a worshiper, would bring, maybe it was a bull or a lamb, or even a bird, but depending on their wealth and how much they could afford, they would bring that animal and they would place their hand on the head of that animal, on the head of that bull. They would press, is the word, and they would kind of symbolically place their sin onto the sacrificial animal, and then they would sacrifice that animal, and the blood would be all over. And so that was the burnt offering, and they would take that offering and burn it on the altar. And that was a sacrifice of atonement. And the sins of the people would be placed on that animal, and that transfer would be made. Now we move into chapter 2. And God gives a different type of a offering, different type of a sacrifice. And it's a sacrifice called a grain offering. And it's a different type of sacrifice, a different type of offering. And it's not where the sins of men or the sins of people are laid on an animal, but it's an offering of grain. And so let's read about this in chapter 2. When anyone presents a grain offering as an offering to the Lord, it is to consist of fine flour. He's to pour olive oil on it and put frankincense on it and bring it to Aaron's sons, the priests. The priest will take a handful of fine flour and oil from it along with all its frankincense and burn this memorial portion of it on the altar, a fire offering, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. But the rest of the grain offering will belong to Aaron and his sons. It's the holiest part of the fire offerings to the Lord. And so you notice here that this was an offering of grain, different types of grain, maybe wheat or something else that was common then. And it was supposed to be made into fine flour, and olive oil was presented with it, as well as this frankincense. And then they could, as you read further on in chapter 2, they could bring it as a grain, or they could cook it. They could put it in a griddle. They could put it in a frying pan. They could put it in a microwave or an Instapot or a crock pot. Not really, but I mean, they could bring it in different ways. And so and I think it's a great idea. They're supposed to bring it to the priest, and they were supposed to, make this nice bread. And then the priest, he gets to eat the rest of it. And I thought, man, that's a great idea, Bake bread for me, and, we can enjoy that together. That'd be a great offering. So they're supposed to create this offering to the Lord. And the purpose of this offering is really found in the word, grain offering. It's found in the Hebrew word for the grain offering. And the Hebrew word, not that you need to remember this really, for grain offering is this word, minha. And it's a word of thanks. It's a thank offering. It's a tribute offering. And so if you're filling in your outline there, the grain offering is a way to say thank you. And so what happened is that, it was called a minha in the Hebrew. In other places in the Old Testament, this word kind of gives us an idea of what this is all about. Look what it says in Judges 6. It says, "Please do not part from here until I come to you and bring out my present, my minha, and set it before you." And he said, "I'll stay till you return." Another passage in 1 Chronicles 16, "Ascribe to the Lord the glory of his name. Bring an offering, bring a minha, and come before him. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness." In Psalm 96, it says, "Ascribe to the Lord the glory of his name. Bring an offering, a minha, and enter his courts." And then in these times as well, people sometimes would offer up a tribute or, memento of respect or something like that to a prophet or to a king. So it says, "The Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he raised up Ehud, son of Gera, a left-handed Benjaminite, as a deliverer for them. The Israelites sent him with the tribute, or the minha, for King Eglon of Moab." And so the point is, the burnt offering is a way to say thank you. It's a way to pay tribute. And I said the basic meaning of a grain offering or a minha offering here in Leviticus 2 is that it's an act of a grateful servant offering a gift of honor, respect, praise, and thanksgiving to God. And so there's a difference between this offering and the first offering. You remember the burnt offering was kind of transferring, it was transferring our sin onto this animal. It was an atonement sacrifice. But this one is more of it's worship. It's giving thanks. It's honoring. It's respecting God who provides all things. And it's basically saying, God, you're the provider of everything. You're the giver of all things. You're the one that protects me from everything. You're the one that has given me salvation. You're the one that has washed away my sin and wiped my slate clean. I want to offer up my thanks, my respect, my honor to you. And so they would bring this grain and say thank you to God. Now, when you say thank you, your thank you needs to be heartfelt. It needs to be something from the heart, right? I mean, I know probably we've given, maybe even received some gifts from people that really hasn't been heartfelt. It's maybe a secondhand gift or a white elephant gift or something like that, and it's just kind of like, okay, their heart really wasn't in it. We were laughing the other day, back in February, it's Valentine's Day, and Holly and I were laughing because the kids, she works in the school, she works with second graders through fifth graders, and kids would exchange these Valentine's Day cards, be mine, you're special, all that type of stuff. Well, sometimes they give cards to teachers, or sometimes they give cards to, like Holly, people that work in the office. And so Holly got a number of cards, which were really nice from these kids. But the one card that we were kind of laughing at was a card that was, I don't know, it was like somebody didn't want that card and they just kind of shuffled it off on Holly because it said something, I don't know if it was like be mine or you're special or thanks, but then it had the wrong name on it, you know? And it was just kind of like, this is really heartfelt, right? And so we laughed and it's funny, but sometimes we get cards and gifts and thank you cards or whatever, and we know it's really not from the heart. And so when we give something, give a thank you, you know, it takes effort. You know, the thank yous that really you see people put their heart in it mean the most. And that's true with this as well. Look what it says. Whenever anyone presents a grain offering as an offering to the Lord, it consists of fine flour. He is to pour olive oil on it and put frankincense on it. Interesting. Now, these things, I still don't understand. So if some of you know, you're going to have to help me out. But these gifts weren't just things that they had laying around, I don't think. I mean, you think about it. These were people in the desert. They had just, left Egypt in a hurry. They're in the middle of a desert where nothing grows. And God is saying, give me fine flour. I'm like, where do they get that from? Did they bring it along? I don't know. But you remember they had to have manna provided for them by God. And so where do they get this grain? Where do they get olive oil? These are grown on olive trees, and I don't know where olive trees actually grow. I don't know if they're in the middle of a desert though. And to provide oil for all of these people. And then frankincense. Frankincense is something that you find, down in what is known as Oman and Yemen. And it comes from a certain tree, and you got to scrape the sap and all that. Where does that come from? And so these gifts that God prescribes for them are not things that were just laying around. They had to, it took a lot of effort to even find these things. And then, this fine flour, this isn't just your, it's not something you can go to Leppinks and get. You had to get the grain, you had to grind it, you had to make it really fine and perfect before, you can offer it up. And so I could picture, these women are around there, they've gathered up the grain, and they're just, churning the grind in that little mill, and they're making this thing into fine flour. And the whole time, they're just, counting all of the reasons to bless the Lord, to honor the Lord, to say thank you to the Lord. And they're grinding it and grinding it. And then, the oil that they use, they've got to smash those olives. I don't know how to make olive oil, but I imagine you smash it. Maybe you trample on it with your feet or with a mill. I'm not sure. But it takes a lot of work. And then this frankincense as well, it takes a lot of work to find these things. And so the point is, I think God provides some of this stuff for them, but they need to put the effort into making it something that is pleasing to the Lord. And it reminds me of the parable of the talents. You guys remember the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. God gives these people talents. He gives these people money or funds, and they are to take what God has given to them, go invest it before God, or before the king, the ruler, comes back. Same thing with us. God has given to us abilities and skills. He's given to us a brain to think. He has given to us a body to serve him. He has given to us a job, and he's given to us health. He's given to us these resources, and he expects us to put the work in, to invest it, to use it to his glory, to use it to say thank you. And so, as you head off to work, whether it's making widgets or sitting in an office or at a school or wherever you go, God has blessed you with that opportunity, and we are to take that and turn that and use that to honor him, to work to our fullest, to use our body to the fullest, to use our mind to the fullest, in a way to say thank you to him. It's kind of what we have up on the wall. A disciple is someone who takes what God has given him. He is an investor of the resources that God has given us, and we are to use that to build his kingdom and to glorify him. And that's what's happening here. These people have been given these things. They've been given these, resources, and they are to churn it into fine grain or to frankincense or this olive oil to the honor of the Lord. And so I come back to Romans 12. It's a great passage. It says, therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, in view of all the things he has given to us, I urge you to present your bodies, the resources that God has given to you, as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, because this is your true worship. And so God has given us these things, and we need to take them and offer them back to him as a thank offering, like this grain offering. All right, let's keep going. Your heart needs to be in the right place. It says, no grain offering that you present to the Lord is to be made with yeast. Interesting. For you are not to burn yeast or honey as a fire offering to the Lord. Now, why is that? Why aren't we supposed to put yeast in this? That's how you make bread, right? But the Bible doesn't specifically say why we're not supposed to have yeast or honey in there. And all we know, and kind of looking through, is that yeast is a symbol of death, of contamination, of evil, of doing wrong things. The New Testament talks about yeast and leaven, and avoid those things and get rid of the leaven, because it's saying that stuff is the evil stuff. That's the sexual immorality. That's the impurity. That's the unholiness. That's the wrong stuff. We are not supposed to put that in our lives. And that's, I think, what he's saying here in this yeast, that when he's saying in the offering, keep that stuff out. And I think it reminded the people that as they came to worship, they are supposed to be holy. They are supposed to be pleasing. They are supposed to be pure in their worship with the Lord. And it says that about honey, and I don't know exactly the reason for honey, but I believe what it means is that this honey was prone to being fermented, and honey represented death. And so the grain, as they came with their grain offering, they were supposed to be pure in every way. And just like we are to be pure in every way, they were supposed to strive for purity. And so as they came to worship, they are to be holy. As we come to worship, we're to be holy as well. We are to be pure. We are to get rid of the things of the world. The New Testament says this as well. This is Paul speaking, and it says, your boasting is not good. Don't you know that a little leaven or a little yeast leavens the whole batch of dough? Clean out the old leaven. Clean out the stuff of your old life. Clean out the impurities, the unholiness, the immoralities, the deception, the lying. Clean out the old leaven so that you may be new, unleavened batch, as indeed you are. Not with old leaven or with the leaven of malice and evil, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So God values purity. He values holiness, and he values that in us as well. Now, I do want to be clear on one point. I don't want anybody to misunderstand this either, but this doesn't mean that sinful people aren't welcome to worship. Everyone in here is a sinful person. I'm a sinful person. I have a tendency towards sin. That's still part of who I am. I mean, that's part of all of us. So it's not like we have to be perfect before we can come and worship. But the difference, I think, is this, is that people that worship God rightly know that they're sinful people, and they seek help, and they know that they need help from God. They need God in their lives. So we're not holier than thou people. We just know that, man, I'm a sinful person, and I know that I need the Lord to cleanse me, to continue to cleanse me, to continue to lead me. And that's the big difference. And so everyone's welcome. It's just we need to seek the Lord to find the solution to that. So we're to keep the honey, we're to keep the leaven, the yeast out of our lives to be pure. And then it talks about, one thing that we're going to do here is that we are going to, in just a few moments, we are going to celebrate communion. And one of the things that, as it talks about communion in 1 Corinthians 11, it says, as we come to worship him through communion, as we celebrate communion, we need to be people that kind of look at our lives introspectively, and we need to make sure that we're not taking this meal in an unworthy manner. Look what Paul says. He says, so then whoever eats this bread in the Lord's Supper or in communion, and drinks of the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of sin against the body and blood of the Lord. Let a person examine himself in this way. Let him eat the bread and drink it from the cup. For whoever eats and drinks without recognizing the body eats and drinks judgment on himself. And so as we come in just a few moments and take communion, we need to make sure that our hearts are examined, that we're pure, that we're walking with the Lord, that our hearts are right with the Lord, that we've confessed our sin. Because if we don't do that, we're bringing trouble on ourselves. All right, so it goes on to talk about we're supposed to bring in frankincense. We're supposed to kind of put frankincense or this nice fragrant aroma on this offering. And I think it's a sweet aroma. It's a sweet smelling aroma that is a symbol of God's pleasure, of his pleasure as we worship him, as we give thanks. And so we're to put that on this offering as well. And then here's another thing that it talks about that's kind of curious. And I know you guys are probably sitting on these packets of salt and you're wondering, why do we have salt here? Here's why. God wants everyone to know that salt is really important for the covenant. And look what he says here in verse 13. He says, you are to season each of your grain offerings with salt. Okay, I got it. He says it again. You must not omit from your grain offering the salt of the covenant with your God. Okay, he said it twice. You're to present salt with each of your offerings. Okay, he's saying it 3 times. We need to know something's up here, right? And so this salt is an interesting thing. It's, we're to keep the yeast and honey out, but we're supposed to put salt on every sacrifice that we offer. And why is that? Salt represents a permanent covenant, an eternal covenant with his people. And these people were supposed to salt this stuff, and it was just a representative of what people were doing as they gave covenants. Look what it says here in Numbers 18. I give to you and your sons and daughters all the holy contributions that the Israelites present to the Lord as a permanent statute. It is a permanent covenant of salt. Salt represented this permanence. Another place in Chronicles, it says, don't you know that the Lord God of Israel gave the kingship over Israel to David and his descendants forever by a covenant of salt? And so God says, take this salt because it's a picture of my covenant with you. It's a picture of what I offer. And an idea for us is to take this salt and, maybe put it in our pocket. Maybe put it in our car. Maybe put it on the mirror, or, in the mirror over your kitchen sink or something like that, to remember that God's love for us is permanent, that it doesn't change. As these people faced trials, they remembered salt because they remembered that, God provides for them. God protects them. God is always going to be faithful to them. God is always going to love them no matter what. And so as we face trials, through our week, we'll remember, man, God's walking with us through this. As we face temptation, salt purifies. As we face temptation, remember, God wants us to be pure. As we face difficulties, salt is a symbol of endurance. God will endure with us. And so as we're facing difficulties and trials and things are hard for us, we can remember God is walking with us, enduring with us. And so as we face, doubts in our mind, wondering, man, does God still love me? Salt in a covenant reminds us that God's love doesn't fail. God is always with us. Hebrews, I love this passage in Hebrews. It says, keep your life free from the love of money, because people put their hope and their security in money. And he's saying, don't put your security in money, but be satisfied with what you have. For he himself has said, I will never leave you. And that's what salt reminds us of. God is never going to leave us. He's never going to forsake us. He's never, ever, ever going to forsake us, and he will always be with us. Then it says, therefore, we may boldly say, the Lord's my helper. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? And that's what salt reminds us of the permanence of his love and his goodness to us. He's going to be with us. He's going to go with us wherever we go. And so the grain offering is a great sacrifice. It reminds us, that, first of all, usually what happened was people would take this sacrifice of atonement, of sacrificing a lamb or a bull, and, this whole picture of God taking our sin and cleansing us. And then right after that, they would offer up this grain offering. And it's a beautiful picture. God has taken our sin. He has wiped it clean. He has washed us. And we offer up this grain offering, saying, God, thank you so much for protecting me, for providing for me, for offering salvation for me, for going with me no matter where I go, for just being, my God. And I just worship you. I give thanks. I respect you. I honor you. I praise you. And I just want to say thank you. That's what the grain offering is doing. And today we can still do that. And in just a moment, what we're going to do, we're going to celebrate a meal. And the meal is the Lord's Supper. And the Lord's Supper is another beautiful picture today for us as New Testament believers of what God has given to us. And in just a moment, guys, you can go ahead. What we're going to do is we're going to have two elements in our hands. We're going to have a piece of bread, which represents Christ's body that was broken for us, that was given for us. And in the other cup is juice, representing Christ's blood that was shed for us so that we could have the forgiveness of sins. And it's a beautiful picture for us to remind us, kind of like that atonement sacrifice, that his body was sacrificed for us so that our sins could be wiped clean, so that we could have a clean slate, that he has washed us, forgiven us, given us new life, and given us righteousness. And at the same time, that the cup of bread and the cup of juice remind us and I guess encourage us to give thanks. To give thanks to him for being our God, being our provider, being the God that has given us salvation, the one that loves us continually. And so as you hold those cups in your hands, these guys are going to pass a plate in front of you. There's two cups there. The one on the bottom has the bread. The one on top has the juice. Hold that in your hand. And maybe you want to just bow your head and just maybe offer up a word of thanks. Maybe it's, God, thank you for your goodness to me. Thank you for your love for me that never fails. God, thank you for the blessings that you allow me to have. Maybe it's a blessing of relationships. Maybe it's the blessings of a gift that you have. Maybe it's salvation. Maybe it's the sense of all your guilt has been wiped away. Take this moment right now and praise the Lord.